Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk about how to handle seeing your therapist out in public. Stay tuned. Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. So, this video is part of an 8-part series so far that is about things your therapist doesn't tell you, because these are things that are very informative to helping you get good therapy, but things that we don't necessarily cover in the first session because it would be too much time. It would be too cumbersome to do that. So I made this series with extra things that are really good to know to help you get good therapy. And if you want to go back and start watching this series with part one, I'll put a link up at the top here, but you can actually watch this series in any order that you want. They're just all oriented around this topic of things that would be good to know as a patient in therapy, but that we don't necessarily cover in great detail, especially in the first session. And we tend to deal with them kind of ad hoc as they come up in therapy. But in my opinion, there's some of these things that are good to know, which is why I'm making this series. By the way, if you like this kind of content, definitely hit the like button on this video. And if you have yet to subscribe to my channel, I would love to have you as a subscriber. So please hit the subscribe button as well. All right. So let me talk about this topic today, which is, what do you do if you see your therapist out in public? Okay. Now, if you are my patient, you can take this information in this video as gospel, because I've had this policy through my whole career and I will continue to have this policy. Other therapists might have a different way of thinking about it and expressing it, but I would assume that most therapists would actually be pretty highly aligned with what I'm sharing here. But if you're not my patient and you're seeing another therapist, uh, certainly you can bring it up if you happen to live near your therapist, where you might end up running into them in public, right? Because I'd rather you clarify this in your own head and maybe with your therapist than end up in a situation where it causes you some confusion or some anxiety about privacy and things like that. So here's my policy that I follow, because for my whole career, for 2.5 decades, I have practiced in a small town, right? And I do telehealth, so I see people far and wide all over the state of Indiana and all over the state of Washington. There are many patients I see that I'm very unlikely to ever see in real life because I'm so geographically remote from them. However, I do see patients, and I have seen patients who reside in the same town that I actually live in, right? And it's not a huge town. The town I live in, the population is somewhere around 100,000 people. So the chances of running into someone who lives in the same city is non-zero and worth addressing to some degree, because it does happen that you run into your therapist in public. I've had many of my patients turn the corner in the aisle in the grocery store and see me and things like that, and or be, seated at a table not far from me at a restaurant, things like that. So I want to give this information to clarify not only to my patients how you can treat me if you see me in public, but also because I think this is informative for therapy patients in general. Your therapist likely has exactly the same attitude that I do about this, right? So the short answer to what if you see your therapist in public is, you don't have to do anything. You are 100% off the hook for having to acknowledge the therapist or act like you know that person. And I think this is the place where people get a little bit confused, because sometimes, we have these natural inclinations of how to interact with people that we have different levels of connection to. And so it may seem confusing or awkward if you are walking through the grocery store and you see your therapist, to then have to make a decision in that moment about how to interact with that person or not, right? So the purpose of this video is to let you off the hook now so that if you do see me in public or you see your therapist in public, it's not in that moment that you have to clarify what to do about it. You already know in your head what to do about it, which is you actually don't have to do anything. So it does not offend me if you're my patient and you see me in public and you absolutely act like you don't know me. I do not initiate contact in public with a patient. So I won't say, "Hey, Joe, nice to see you," before Joe does something, right? Because if my patient Joe decides he does not want to acknowledge that he even knows me and he's going to just walk right past me in the aisle in the grocery store like he has no clue who I am, that is absolutely fine because part of what that does is it protects his privacy and it protects Joe's right for autonomy, right? I'm not directing Joe's choices about disclosing his relationship to me, even though if I say, "Hey, Joe," obviously that might not necessarily be outing him to the other people in the grocery store because the other people may not um, know what that nature of that relationship is. But here's the risk, okay? Even though it's a minuscule risk, this policy protects against it. So the risk for Joe is Joe might think in that moment in the grocery store where he sees me that if I say, "Hi, John," to my therapist, he's worried that there's someone else standing in the grocery store who happens to know that I'm a therapist. And if he says, "Hi, John," he's potentially worried that the other person assumes that he knows me because he's my patient, right? That's the minuscule risk, but it's an actual threat to a person's privacy in terms of sensitive health information. And it's a reasonable thing to protect by just choosing to not acknowledge. Now, I'm not saying that I have a rule that my patients can't acknowledge me if they choose to do so. What I'm saying is that I am not going to decide for them in that type of situation what they're going to choose to do about it. To be honest, I have had some patients over the years who are just wildly extroverted, wildly open people and who have no care at all about people knowing that I'm their therapist. And I've had people literally run up, give me a hug, and scream, "This is John, my therapist," to someone standing next to them. That's fine. As a patient, you own your private information. And if you're going to broadcast it, doesn't hurt me. That's your information, and it's about protecting it for you, right? This has nothing to do with protecting the privacy of the therapist. I'm a therapist. It's public knowledge, so you're not outing me as a therapist because I'm not in secret. I'm not closeted, right, in public. So that's fine. I'm not walking along with like my hospital badge or something that says John the therapist, but you're not protecting me. But this policy is just to make sure that you don't feel uncomfortable or feel like your privacy has been violated. So basically, it's okay to not acknowledge your therapist or to do whatever you want with it, right? You're not going to offend me. You're not going to offend your therapist because we all hold privacy as a very paramount value in our work, and we do lots of things to protect privacy. And related to this, I want to say that if I'm out in public and I happen to be with a friend or I happen to be with my wife, someone that I'm obviously closely connected to, and a patient of mine does interact with me in some way, just also know that that doesn't end up giving me permission to out you as my patient to the person I'm close to, right? So, put another way, if my wife is standing next to me and a patient says, "Hi, John," and then my wife says, "Who is that?" I still protect your privacy even from my wife because the fact that I'm a therapist and you're a patient and there's a medical record doesn't automatically make it open to close relatives of the therapist, right? It's still private. So my friends, my wife, only people involved in my practice, for example, my billing person might have some access to some information about my patients. but that person operates under privacy rules as well. But we therapists don't share personal, private, sensitive information with anybody unless there's a need for the person to know. So one of the principles is need to know. And my wife does not need to know the identity of my patients or the content of my relationships with them or my services to them, right? So even someone close to me who doesn't have a need to know isn't going to know anything about you as my patient, and that should be true of all patients on the planet, or of all therapists on the planet. So you should assume that's true. Now, if you are not seeing me as a therapist and you have any concerns about this topic, which is what do I do if I see you in public? I would encourage you just bring it up and clarify it with your therapist. You're most likely to find out that they hold the same attitude that I do about it. But if you want to have peace of mind about that, you can just clarify it with your therapist, and then you don't have to worry about it in the moment when it kind of randomly happens by surprise, right? So anyway, if you like the video, hit the like button. If you have yet to subscribe, please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in an upcoming video. Thanks for joining me today.